Okay, so in Unit 1, this is our first unit we're starting today. What we will cover is learning about Photoshop's repair and restore tools, okay? So this is typical when you think of somebody photoshopping a document, it's this kind of thing. Repairing a damaged image, fixing imperfections in the image, stuff like that, okay? So this is basic Photoshop stuff that any photographer or graphic design or any kind of imaging professional, will want to know. So things we learn in this unit: healing brush tool, the patch tool, spot healing brush tool, clone stamp tool, using layers, copying selections, transforming, blending modes, layer masks, opacity, noise reduction, sharpening, and adjustment curves. It's actually quite a long list, okay? How many of you think you've used some of these before in the intro class or at any time? Probably most of them, okay? So what you want to do is follow along the steps in exercise 1 to learn the techniques, which we will be using for project 1, okay? Okay, so our first exercise. You'll see here that I have video tutorials. I have like 46, I have like almost 2 full hours of me going through and doing this exercise. Part of the reason why it takes 2 hours is because I'm explaining every little step of this. You don't have to go through and watch those video tutorials. However, what I'm going to do right now is highlight some of the key steps, okay? Highlight some of the tools we're going to use. So you'll see that what we're doing is repairing and then colorizing a damaged old photo. Okay, so I'm going to save this photo, exercise 1 original, to my desktop. We'll take a look at this guy. Okay, this is the damaged photo. And it is quite damaged, isn't it? There's a big rip going through this photo. The part of the guy's eye is missing. Part of his ear and hairline are missing. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to go through the steps to correct this very quickly. I'm not going to do this detailed. That's going to be up to you. But all the steps that you want to follow are in either this web page link, or you can download a PDF here. I'm just going to go to the web page link. I've taken the original HTML, which you see here, put it in a web page and edited it to be a little bit more specific. Okay. So this goes through a bunch of steps, and this document is just repairing the image. Okay. The second step of this process is adding color back into this image. Okay. So a few of the tools we're going to use here are explained. There are many repair tools in Photoshop. Okay. We'll see this, if you guys look at this little Band-Aid icon here, and notice Photoshop has this cool little thing where you used to just say the name of it. Now you hover over it and it gives you like a little video of what it does. Geez, I don't even need to teach anymore. Photoshop just does it for you. Okay, so the spot healing brush tool, if you right click on that, you'll notice that there's a whole list of tools here. Okay, there's a bunch of correction tools. Spot healing brush tool, which is kind of the automatic tool. There's the healing brush tool, the patch tool, and the content aware move tool, and the red eye tool. We're going to look at the first 3. Okay, so how the spot healing brush tool is, it kind of automatically does the work for you. So in our Photoshop file, we of course want to make an originals group. Before we get into these tools, originals, I'm going to just drag this background into the originals group after I unlock it. Press the little lock icon to unlock it, drag it into originals. Okay, I'm going to duplicate my originals group and rename it to, let's see, what's it called? Repairs. Okay, and then later we'll make a colors group. I'm going to call this one base layer. Okay, and then I'm going to even, I don't need to duplicate that. Let's see what our spot healing brush tool does. And notice the difference between the spot healing brush tool and the healing brush. The spot healing brush tool has this little like dotted round icon behind it. So this is kind of an automatic tool. and it's for spots, okay? So if we zoom in a little bit to this image, now notice I'm at 400%, okay? This is not the size we're going to be viewing this image at. We would view this image at 100. So you don't need to zoom in to 600% and find like all the little tiny spots in this image. You're going to be wasting time, okay? So keep it a little bit zoomed out, closer to 200 or 300%, and just correct some of the major spots. So I'm going to just find some of these spots that are in the image and just click on it with my spot healing brush tool. And Photoshop does its best to correct those little spots, and it does a pretty good job of it, okay? It does a pretty good job of it. You do only want to use the spot healing brush tool for spots, okay? It doesn't work great with these big damaged creases in the photo, okay? So you want to go through and do that. And I should say at the start here, you're going to have, let's look at our schedule. You're going to have, I think, 2 more class periods to work on this exercise before it's due. Okay, so I'm just going through and showing you the tools now, but you'll have all of our next class meeting, all of the meeting after that, except for a short lecture on our project to work on this. And this won't be due until January 23rd, I think. Okay, so you've got some time to work on this.
What was the name of this? What should we save this as?
You can save this as, you know, whatever your name, exercise 1. I'm not too specific as long as it's descriptive that it's yours and what the assignment is. Good point. We should be saving our stuff. Okay, so the spot healing brush tool is good for exactly that, spots. Okay, then if we right click on this guy and go, it's also control click, does the same thing on a Mac as right click. If we go to healing brush tool, notice it's not spot healing brush tool, it's healing brush tool. The way the healing brush tool works is it needs input from you to know what to fix. Okay, for example, we have this little kind of watermark thing in the photo. Before I can do anything, I try to click and it gives me this little error message, option click to define a source point. Okay, so what I need to do is tell Photoshop to replace where I'm using the brush, what to use to replace it with. So I'm going to press option, click, or when I press option, you'll see you get this little crosshair here. Okay, I'm going to click right above the source of this to define the spot that I'm going to use to fill in these pixels. Okay, so notice when I hover, it's showing the pixels from up here down here because it's going to apply those to this section. Okay, so I can click and notice as I'm clicking and using the brush, I have this little crosshair above the brush. It's showing me the area that it's using to source pixels from to fill in this space. Okay, so I can do that. If I keep it pretty much vertical from where my original source was, I can almost use this one to go through and correct a lot of this area. Okay, and it does it imperfectly, and I still see some evidence of that repair here, right? It's like a little bit darker along here. So I might want to re-click another area to use as a source and kind of fill it in a little bit to kind of get some of that darkness to disappear. I'll source something down here and kind of fill in this area. And I'm beginning to kind of get rid of evidence of there being a rip in that area. Okay? Takes a little bit of finesse. You can play with it. When I'm working on this kind of stuff, I just put on some Bob Ross and just kind of play with some happy little pixels. Okay? So that's how to use the healing brush tool. For the healing brush tool, we need to define a source for the pixels we're going to use to fill in. The other part of the healing brush tool is depending on what you want to use, you want to look at your brush settings. So up at the very top here, mine shows a little circle and it has a 19 in the top left of my menu. Usually we might want to actually bring that hardness down to a lower setting. What that does is the edges of the brush kind of feather out a little bit, and it makes the transition a little bit smoother. The healing brush tool does do this on its own somewhat, but we may want to choose the hardness or the spacing. The spacing is like how often it reapplies the pixels as you're moving the cursor around. Okay, so that can kind of smooth some of the edges of the effects that you're filling in. Okay, and then the third option under the healing brush tool here is the patch tool. And the patch tool is for correcting large areas of an image. It is somewhat imperfectly. Often you'll want to do the patch tool and then go back to one of your healing brush options to kind of fill in the imperfections. But to use the patch tool, we first want to define an area that we're going to fill in. Okay, so when I go to the patch tool, I get this little icon where it shows kind of this patch, and then it shows this black arrow. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this and I'm going to draw. You can see as I draw, it's like showing this highlight of where I'm drawing. I'm going to draw around this kind of rip that's on the right-hand side here. And you see what's happening is I'm drawing an area here. So this, I'm defining the area that is to be patched. Okay, so now I've done that. What I can do is click inside this area and then move, and notice as I move the pixel around, I am changing the source pixels to fill in that area with. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it up and I'm going to try to kind of get this lined up so that the shading and that background curtain kind of matches the similar vertical line to fill in. Okay, and then it just kind of fills in those pixels somewhat imperfectly. You'll notice, like, I can kind of, if I look at my screen, I can kind of see this area where I patched it in, right? And then because I moved it a little bit left and right, a little bit horizontally, it didn't fill everything in all the way over to the right. So at that point, I might want to take my healing brush tool and kind of recontour some of those edges, kind of fix some of the stuff that it didn't fix the first time around. And I'm just clicking to redefine and going back down and kind of filling in that space. Okay, and then at the edge of the ear, you might want to zoom in, and you can use the left and right brackets on your keyboard to make your brush size smaller or bigger. Okay, might want to make a smaller brush. Nope, nope, just the brackets. Yeah, when you have a brush activated, you just hit the brackets and it changes the size. Okay, so already, and I still see areas of this where I could spend a little bit more time on the background to correct it, but already we've got pretty much the rip taken out of the background of this image, right? Okay. So if we take a look at our directions here and kind of follow along, what it does, it kind of shows the steps of using the patch tool, correcting the background. Maybe we want to look at how the clone stamp tool works. Okay, the clone stamp tool does not attempt to repair the image. The healing brush tool takes the pixels that you're defining, or it automatically chooses them if it's the spot healing brush tool. It takes the pixels that you've defined and tries to overlap them on top of what is there and kind of repair the image and make it all look like it works together. Okay, it does that imperfectly. The clone stamp tool does nothing of the sort. It just directly copies the pixels that you've defined for it to use. Okay, so for example, if I pick the clone stamp tool, and let me see if I can find a spot where this would work well here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the clone stamp tool and I'm going to set my hardness all the way. Okay, a hardness of 100%. I'm going to pick the clone stamp tool, and I'll just for instructional purposes, I'm going to use his left eye right in the middle of his pupil as my defining source pixels. Okay, if I bring this over to the right, you notice it's showing an image of what that source pixel was. So with the clone stamp tool selected, I've hovered over his left eye pupil, hit the option button, and clicked. I'm defining, very much like the healing brush tool, I'm defining the source pixels. But when I bring this over here, it doesn't attempt to like intermingle these pixels with the pixels that were there. It just overwrites everything with the exact same pixels as my source pixels.
Keep the clone stamp, so once you hover over his eye,
You press option click. Option click to define your source pixels. Okay? So the clone stamp tool directly copies the pixels that you use as a source. Now, this is not how we want to correct his right eye, because the left eye is shaped differently than the right eye. It should be inverted, right? So I'm going to undo what I just did. But in essence, that's how the clone stamp tool works. Now, I could change my hardness to a lower hardness, and what it will do is kind of soften the edges of the brush. Okay? So it's not as defined, like there isn't a hard outline of where I pasted those, I'm copying the pixels, but it still does directly copy the pixels from the source. Okay? So, once we have the background fixed, we have a few more complicated things to do on his face, right? So what I think I want to do is, let's take a look at the instructions just to make sure we're kind of meeting what the instructions done. Okay, we have the first part of the restoration done with the background. Now for the serious defects in the picture. So the way the instructions have you do this is to copy the left half of his face. What we're going to do is flip that and put it on top of the right half in order to get rid of this big, like, ripped area of the photo. Okay? So I will do that. We can use the marquee tool over here. This is the selection tool. And the marquee selection just selects that area to be used. I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool and just select kind of this left area of his face. Okay, now I don't want to delete these pixels. I just want to use them. So I'm just going to press Command J. And remember how when we were doing our resolution and setup exercise, when I pressed Command J and I had a layer selected, it duplicated the entire layer. When you have a selection made and you press Command J, it only duplicates the selected area. Okay, so I'm going to press Command J, and you'll see that I have this new layer 1 in my file. I'm going to call it eye and ear for now, because that's what I'm going to be using to correct the eye and ear. And so you'll see if I turn off my other layers, I've just duplicated just that one section of the face that I had selected before. Okay, so I'm going to turn my base layer back on. And then what I'm going to do is that eye and ear layer, I'm going to drop the opacity of that layer. Okay, now if I press V or I click this little move tool icon here, what I can do is I can move that layer, the contents of that layer. Notice since I reduced the opacity by clicking on the little opacity over on the right-hand side, fit this on the projector, by clicking on the opacity here, I can kind of see through the layer and see what's below it. Okay? So what I want to do now is press Command T to transform that. And then in the transform mode, if you control click or right click in that area, I can tell it to flip that horizontally. Okay? And then what happens is it takes everything on the left side of the face and turns it into, and technically his right side of his face, but it takes everything on the left side of the image, flips it horizontally, so it's approximately the correct orientation to go to the right side of the image. You'll notice that even this is imperfect, right? If you press Command T for transform, and then you right click inside of that box, or control click, you should get a flip horizontal option towards the bottom there. Okay, so what I can do now, since I have my opacity turned down, I can kind of reorient this so that it's in approximately the right place. Now, this is a little bit of what's called the Uncanny Valley. Nobody has a perfectly symmetrical face, and if it is perfectly symmetrical, it actually looks really weird to us if you ever see a perfectly symmetrical face. So not only is he probably not looking exactly 100% towards the camera, but his face is quite asymmetrical, which is normal. It should be like that. So I actually don't want to stretch this out too far, because what happens when I stretch it out is it makes this like really wide area between the eye and the ear, and it makes it look quite stretched. So what I think I'll do with this is I'm just going to get this in about the right spot for it to work for the eye. Okay, just going to get this in about the right spot for it to work with the eye, and then we'll mess with the ear in a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to rename this to the eye, because I think I'm just going to use this part for the eye. I'll increase the opacity a bit here. And then what I need to do is I have this kind of outline happening along the edges of these copied pixels that I don't need. Since I've decided I'm only going to use it for the eye, I need to hide the rest of the layer. Okay? Remember I mentioned non-destructive edits? We are going to use a mask. Okay, we are not going to delete these pixels. I may need them at some point. I may accidentally, delete part of the eye when really I meant to use it. So I'm going to make a mask. So when I click this little square with a dark circle icon at the bottom here, this does not fit quite well on the projector, does it? Let me see if I can fix this so that everybody can see it. And then it disappears. Okay. Okay, so this little icon right here, this is the layer mask icon. I can click that on this layer, and it makes, you'll see the eye layer, and you'll see the little preview of what's in that layer, and then to the right there's this kind of white canvas area. Okay, that is your mask. Is anybody not familiar with how a mask works? Okay, just to be 100% clear, the way a mask works is you can paint separately in this area, and it's a range of white to black. Anything that is white in this mask is allowed to show through above the layers underneath it. Anything that is black in this mask is hidden all the way. So I can do a medium value of 50% gray to partially show or hide something. Okay, so what I'm going to do inside this mask is, you'll note down here in the bottom left, I have black selected as a color. I'm going to take a brush by pressing B, and with my mask selected using the color black, and I'm going to use a quite soft, a low hardness brush. I can start painting in this layer, and voila, the contents of where I paint is starting to be hidden. Okay, I'm going to try to pretty much hide everything except for the eye, since I'm using the eye. I'm using this just for the eye right now. Okay, if I make a mistake, I can press X. Notice since I have black as my foreground color, white as my background color, if that's not the case for you, you can press this little smaller icon above it to make the white and black the default colors here. I can press X to very quickly switch between the foreground and background color. So if I make a mistake, I can press X, switch over to white, and I can paste back in those pixels and allow them to be shown again. Okay, so in that manner, you can very quickly jump between hiding and revealing contents of this layer by using the mask and by using white and black. Okay? I'm going to do that for my eye, and then I might, kind of mess with this a little bit and make sure that the eye is kind of placed correctly and it feels spaced correctly, and also at the same time I don't want it to look too much like a mirror image of the other one, so I might like stretch it a little bit just to stay away from the Uncanny Valley situation. Okay, so I pretty much have the eye corrected. Do we see how we could take this method and then also correct the ear? Maybe correct the hairline at the top by copying and duplicating, flipping it over, and filling in the pixels. Now I'll tell you, specifically for the ears are shaped very differently. You're going to want to duplicate the ear and stretch it around a little bit, maybe rotate it a little bit to get it to fit over the other ear. So if I, real quick, I'll show you how to do those steps. If I duplicate the base layer again just for the ear, I'm going to call this the ear. Transform, I will flip it. Okay, when you're in the transform mode, notice if I hover kind of just outside of one of the corners, I get this little rotate icon. I can use that to rotate the layer. Okay, I can grab the corners to kind of stretch it. And then I can even do other transforms by right-clicking in this space. I could do something like warp it. It gives me this little thing where I can kind of warp the inside contents. Okay, and using some of those methods and kind of playing around with it, I can reasonably well get this ear to be shaped like the other ear. Okay. And then I can bring my opacity up a little bit, and then I can add a mask and kind of hide the areas of that layer that I don't need. Okay. And that should give you, so once you get these various items of the right side of the image placed, the eye, the ear, the hairline fixed, using the previous methods of the clone stamp tool and the healing brush tool and the patch tool, that should give you all the tools you need to correct the face, right? To get all those corrections done. Okay, are there any questions on this part of the exercise? The next step of this assignment is to add color to the face, which I'm going to do that lecture at the next class. The next class is optional on Tuesday. However, I will be here. You're welcome to come and get the lecture in person, ask questions, etc. And I will be recording it and posting that online for you to review. And in fact, if you go in to this assignment now, I have those 2 hours of video with all the steps. I have little links to each parts of the video that take you to the certain step you might want to look at to make those repairs. So if you want to work ahead before Tuesday, feel free to. But otherwise, we'll be here talking about how to colorize this on Tuesday. Okay, any questions? Yes, one sec. Let me stop my recording here.